The day began like any other for the small research team working at the remote space observatory. The center sat on a quiet hill far from busy cities, where the night sky always looked a little darker and clearer than anywhere else. Most people didn't even know the place existed, but for the team working there, it was their second home. They spent long nights watching blinking dots on screens, checking strange signals, and adjusting instruments that always seemed to need one more fix. They had been running a new experiment for almost 3 months. It involved a gravity mapping probe, something not much bigger than a refrigerator, but incredibly sensitive. The idea was simple: send out tiny waves, measure the distortions, and use them to build a map of anything unusual hiding in deep space. They didn't expect to find anything dramatic. Mostly, they were looking for dark matter pockets, small clusters of asteroids, or maybe a new comet. Just normal scientific work. That morning, the main technician, an older person with a calm voice and steady hands, adjusted the controls, while the younger assistant monitored the readings on the large curved screen. A few others sat nearby with notebooks, drinking warm tea and waiting for another routine day of small discoveries that would be written into reports only a few hundred people would ever read. Then something unusual happened. A small spike appeared on the monitor. Nothing big, just a tiny blip. The assistant noticed it first and leaned closer. The technician looked over too and frowned. It was the kind of signal that didn't match any of the usual patterns they knew. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't radiation. It wasn't a satellite, and it wasn't noise from their own equipment. The shape of the spike was too clean, too intentional. The assistant asked if it might just be another glitch in the probe. The technician shook their head. They had seen glitches for years. They always looked messy and uneven. This signal was almost perfect, like a small tap on a glass surface. The team gathered around as the data repeated itself, again and again, each time shaping the same clean curve. Something was interacting with the probe, and not just once, but many times in a steady rhythm. The team discussed possibilities. Maybe they had stumbled upon an unknown natural phenomenon. Maybe a new type of pulsar? Maybe a gravitational wave from some distant collision? They wrote down all the guesses, but none of them truly matched the rhythm of the signal. It was too controlled. Finally, they decided to boost the signal slightly, just to see if they could get a clearer reading. It was a small adjustment, a kind they had done hundreds of times before. But this time, the result shocked them. The screen began to fill with shapes, lines, curves, loops, almost like a pattern trying to form itself. At first, they were sure it had to be an error. No natural event behaved like that. The shapes were deliberate, almost like someone far away was noticing their signal and responding. The assistant's hands froze over the controls. The technician whispered that they should probably stop the boost. But before anyone could move, the entire room filled with a soft tremor, the kind you feel in your chest before you feel it in your feet. Nothing shook physically. The teacups didn't rattle, and the equipment stayed steady, but the air itself seemed to tighten for a moment, then relax again. The probe had slipped into something, or something had slipped into it. The screens turned bright for a second, then the images stabilized. A whirl of data flowed across the monitors, too fast to read. It looked like long strands of unfamiliar characters mixed with numbers that didn't fit any human system. Even the technician, who had decades of experience, couldn't make sense of any of it. One thing became clear. They had made contact with something outside human understanding. But what exactly that meant, nobody could guess. After a few minutes, the room returned to its normal hum. The strange data slowly faded. The probe went quiet again, except for a slow repeating pulse. This pulse felt different from the earlier one. It felt welcoming, as if acknowledging the humans on the other side. The team looked at each other with a mix of fear, awe, and confusion. They knew they had stumbled onto something big, something they hadn't prepared for at all. The technician suggested, sending a small reply, just a simple ping, nothing too complex or risky. It was a way of saying, "We are here." The team discussed it for several minutes. They worried it might trigger something unexpected, but they also felt that ignoring it might be worse. If this was a natural phenomenon, the ping would do nothing. If it wasn't, well, they would cross that bridge when they reached it. In the end, curiosity won. The assistant sent the ping. For a full minute, nothing happened. The team stared at the screens, barely breathing. Then the tremor returned, very gently this time, almost like a polite knock. A new symbol formed on the screen. It didn't look like anything from Earth. It was a circle with 3 small lines crossing it, glowing softly. Then it dissolved, and another symbol appeared. Then another dot. Someone whispered that it looked like a greeting. Before the team could respond, the room lights flickered, the computers buzzed, and then, without warning, a soft glow filled the far corner of the control room. Not bright, but just enough to create a shape. A shimmering outline of something like a small window hovered in midair. Nobody dared to touch it or move too close. The glow wasn't scary. It didn't make any noise. It looked almost peaceful, like a reflection in water. The window flickered, and for a moment, the team could see something beyond it, a wide room filled with soft silver light and smooth curved surfaces. Everything looked distant and slightly blurred, as if underwater. They could only see it for a few seconds before the glow dimmed again, and the floating window vanished completely. Nobody said anything. The air in the room felt heavier, like the moment after hearing news you can't fully understand yet. The assistant finally broke the silence, saying that maybe the wormhole theories weren't so crazy after all. The technician quietly agreed. The idea that they had accidentally opened some sort of pathway, however small, suddenly felt very real. They checked their coordinates. Everything looked normal. The planet was still in its place. The stars were the same. Yet they felt like they had crossed a line that humans had never crossed before. The strangest part was how gentle the whole experience felt. It didn't feel like a threat or an invasion. It felt more like someone distant had noticed them tapping on a door and had opened a small crack, curious to see who was there. The team sat back, trying to process the moment. None of them believed they had discovered a new star or a natural cosmic event. The signs pointed to something far more intelligent, perhaps even an entire civilization. But instead of excitement, something else settled in the room: disbelief. For decades, humans had imagined grand cosmic empires with gigantic space fleets, glowing worlds, and impossible technology. If the shimmering window truly belonged to a galactic empire, then their first impression was surprisingly ordinary. It didn't look like the future. It didn't look impossible. It looked like something humans could almost imagine building. In a few more decades, the technician rubbed their eyes and said that maybe humans had been giving aliens too much credit. Maybe the universe was not filled with super advanced wonders. Maybe everyone out there was just trying their best, just like humans were. They would learn later just how right that guess was. But in that moment, all they knew was that they had stepped into something huge completely by accident, and the universe had stepped back, not with awe or fear, but with simple curiosity. And now they had to decide what to do next. The next morning, the research team arrived at the observatory earlier than usual. Everyone had barely slept, but excitement kept them awake. The shimmering window from the previous night stayed in their minds like a dream they couldn't shake off. Some of them replayed the moment again and again, wondering if it had really happened or if exhaustion had played tricks on them. But the readings on the machines were still their hard evidence that something out of the ordinary had taken place. They expected more strange signals or another glow appearing somewhere. Instead, the screens stayed quiet. The machines hummed, like they always did, blinking with the same small lights. It almost felt disappointing. After something so extraordinary, the room looked painfully normal. But just when they began to think nothing else would happen, the probe gave a small pulse. It wasn't as strong as the one that opened the window, but it was still clear enough to catch everyone's attention. One of the researchers leaned closer to the monitor and said it looked like a waypoint signal, almost like someone on the other side was saying, "Follow this." Nobody knew what that meant, or how they were supposed to follow a signal that was floating somewhere in deep space. The probe couldn't physically travel. It only sent and received waves. But as the team analyzed the pattern, they noticed something unusual. The signal wasn't pointing them outward toward stars or planets. It was pointing inward, almost like something nearby was folding the space around them. Before they could figure it out, the tremor returned. This time stronger, but still harmless. The air shimmered again, and the window slowly formed bigger than the last time. Everyone stepped back as the glow spread until it nearly touched the ceiling. Inside the glowing frame, the blurry room they had seen the night before became clearer. Lines sharpened. Colors grew brighter. Soft silver, pale gold, and deep blue blended into a strange but calming palette. It didn't look like a spaceship, yet it didn't look like a natural room either. It looked like a mix of advanced engineering and artistic design, but still strangely simple. The technician whispered that maybe the window wasn't just showing a place. Maybe it was a doorway. The glow flickered twice, almost like a signal for them to approach. Nobody dared to go too close, but curiosity kept them rooted in place. Then, unexpectedly, a shape appeared inside the frame. A tall figure walked into view, though still slightly blurred by the shimmering surface. Their walk was careful, slow, almost polite. The figure stopped a few steps away from the inside of the window and stood still as though waiting. The team exchanged nervous glances. They didn't know if they should speak or make some gesture. They had no idea what customs existed on the other side. After several silent seconds, the assistant nervously waved. The figure responded with a small tilt of the head. Not threatening, not dramatic, just a slow, friendly acknowledgement. Then it stepped back, and another figure came into the frame. This one held a small rectangular object that glowed softly. The glowing object projected a symbol, the same circle with 3 lines they had seen on the monitor. The assistant quickly typed a reply using the probe controls, trying to mimic the symbol as best as possible. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. The window flickered brighter for a moment. Someone on the other side must have understood the attempt. Then everything changed. A soft but clear tone filled the room, like the sound of 2 glasses lightly touching. The glow widened until the edges reached the walls of the observatory. The lights in the room dimmed automatically, as if responding to the change in atmosphere. The technician whispered that the window might be stabilizing. That meant the connection wasn't temporary now. It was opening into something bigger. Nobody had planned for this. Nobody had expected this. The window became so clear that it looked like an actual doorway. Through it, the team could see a long hallway stretching into the distance. The walls were smooth and curved, with faint markings that looked decorative rather than functional. The floor shined gently, without showing any reflection. Soft floating lights hovered near the ceiling, moving slowly like fireflies following a rhythm, and a deep, warm voice echoed through the window. It wasn't in any known human language, but somehow it didn't feel harsh or frightening. It felt like a greeting. The sound lasted only a few seconds before dissolving into silence. The technician said they should record everything. The assistant typed quickly, while another researcher adjusted a small camera near the window. But instead of capturing the scene, the camera flickered and turned off. The window seemed to interfere with any electronic device pointed directly at it. The figures inside the hallway watched calmly. One of them moved closer again. They raised a small panel that produced a soft ripple. The ripple passed through the window and into the observatory. It didn't hit anyone or anything. It just flowed around gently like a warm breeze. The ripple left behind a shape floating symbols forming a small line of characters. They glowed softly before fading. The technicians studied the fading marks. They didn't know what they meant, but they felt like an invitation. The assistant said out loud what everyone was already thinking. Maybe this was a request to visit, to step through the window, to enter whatever world existed on the other side. But fear held them back. Nobody wanted to be the first to walk into a place they didn't understand. Yet at the same time, nobody wanted to miss the chance of a lifetime. After minutes of nervous silence, the decision came from something unexpected. The window suddenly grew brighter again, but not in a threatening way. It was more like the other. Side was trying to be reassuring, showing that there was no danger. The glow softened, and the hallway looked even clearer. The lights inside the hall dimmed slightly, creating a calm, welcoming tone. A researcher at the back finally stepped forward. Not too close, just enough to test something. They reached out with a pencil and slowly touched the glowing surface. The pencil went through, not dissolved, not burned. It simply passed through as if dipping into water. The researcher pulled it back out and checked it. It was perfectly fine. The team exchanged looks. Their worry began to turn into curiosity again. The assistant asked what would happen if they sent a drone through first. It was the safest option. The technician agreed and brought out a small hovering drone they used for equipment checks. They turned it on and pushed it forward. It hovered near the glowing surface for a moment, then slowly slipped through the window. Inside the hall, the drone floated gently. The figures stepped aside, giving it space. The drone recorded everything smooth. Walls, floating lights, strange symbols. It even recorded the soft hum in the air, a sound not made by machines, but by something else entirely. The team watched the live feed with wide eyes. Nothing harmful, nothing alarming. Just a quiet, peaceful setting. The technician finally sighed and said that maybe they were safe enough to take one small step inside. A short visit, just to understand who or what was reaching out so politely. After several long discussions and deep breaths, the assistant stepped forward first. The figure in the window watched patiently. The assistant stretched a hand toward the glowing surface and let it slip through. The glow wrapped around their hand, gently, like warm mist. They stepped through, and nothing bad happened. The assistant stood in the hallway on the other side, looking around in awe. The figures nearby didn't move aggressively. They simply observed, with calm expressions. The place didn't feel threatening at all. In fact, it felt oddly familiar, almost like stepping into a modern museum or quiet airport. The rest of the team slowly followed. One by one, they crossed through the glowing doorway until they were all standing inside the hall. The air was fresh and cool. The lights moved gently above them. Everything was surprisingly simple, almost ordinary. It didn't match the dramatic stories humans had told for generations about alien civilizations. There were no floating cities in view, no impossible machines, no overwhelming brightness. It felt normal, calm, functional, like a place built by people trying their best, not by some unimaginable super-empire. One researcher whispered that the place looked less like a futuristic marvel and more like a slightly upgraded government building. A few others quietly agreed that it was their first step into a galactic empire, and it was far less amazing than they expected. Yet somehow, that made it even more interesting. The team didn't know what to expect after stepping through the glowing doorway, but they certainly didn't expect to be standing in a hallway that felt strangely familiar. The walls were smooth and curved in a style they had never seen on Earth, yet the overall feeling of the place wasn't overwhelming. In fact, it almost reminded them of walking through a newly built airport terminal or a government building that tried hard to look modern, but still felt slightly outdated. They stood quietly as the figures on the other side watched them with patient eyes. The air was cool, and everything smelled faintly metallic, but not unpleasant like the inside of a new elevator. The floating lights above shifted slowly in smooth patterns, creating a soft glow without any harsh brightness. Of the tall figures approached them again. It carried a slim object shaped like a thin book, but glowing faintly at the edges. The team braced themselves, unsure of what would happen next, but nothing strange happened. No sudden beams, no strange noises. Instead, the object projected a small line of symbols in the air, gentle shapes forming and fading again. The assistant whispered that maybe it was a translation device. The technician nodded, but didn't move. The team simply watched while the figure pressed something on the device. The symbols faded and reappeared, this time more slowly. Then something surprising happened. The glowing symbols shifted shape and turned into something that looked like rough approximations of human letters. They weren't perfect, more like someone had watched Earth languages from very far away and tried their best to guess what they looked like. Still, it was a clear effort. One of the researchers stepped forward and said a gentle, "Hello." Their voice echoed slightly in the long hallway. The tall figure paused, then raised the glowing object again. The device emitted a smooth tone, and then produced a word that almost sounded like "hello," although the tone was slightly off, as if someone with a very calm voice tried to imitate a human. The entire team exchanged looks of surprise. They didn't expect the aliens, if that's what these beings truly were, to attempt communication so quickly. It felt polite, almost humble. Nothing like the dramatic, powerful first contact moments everyone had imagined in stories. After a few more attempts, the device managed to produce a few simple words. They weren't perfect, but good enough for basic understanding. The tall figure spoke through the device in a slow, measured tone. The translation produced simple phrases. "Follow us, safe, welcome." The team hesitated, unsure if they should move forward. But the figures waited patiently, without showing any pressure or force. It felt more like a tour guide waiting for guests who were taking too long to tie their shoes. Eventually, curiosity won again. The team followed the figures down the hallway. Their footsteps echoed quietly on the smooth floor. As they walked, the hallway opened into a much larger space. The moment they entered, they expected something breathtaking: cities floating under glass domes, glowing energy rivers, something impossible. But what they saw instead stopped them for a completely different reason. The large space looked like a transit station. There were platforms stretching out in different directions, soft lights marking pathways, and floating signs with symbols that glowed in muted colors. Several round vehicles hovered on the platforms, but none of them looked particularly futuristic. They were smooth and shiny, yes, but not extraordinary. They moved slowly, humming softly, looking more like polished public transport pods than advanced alien crafts. The assistant whispered, under their breath, that they had expected something grand. The technician quietly agreed, but reminded everyone not to judge too quickly. They were standing in the middle of the galactic empire, after all. Maybe the impressive things were somewhere else. As they slowly walked across the station floor, the drone hovered behind them, recording everything. The figures guiding them didn't mind. They simply continued walking at a comfortable pace. Other tall beings moved around the station as well. They glanced at the humans with mild curiosity, but didn't rush over or react dramatically. If anything, the humans felt like tourists who had accidentally wandered into a place locals used every day without thinking twice. It wasn't intimidating or overwhelming. It was just ordinary. A small pod vehicle slid toward them, stopping quietly by the edge of the platform. The tall figure gestured for the team to step inside. They hesitated again, but the pod looked harmless. It even had cushions lining the inside walls. One researcher joked softly that the cushions looked like something bought from a discount furniture store, which made the others bite back laughter. Once everyone stepped inside, the door closed quietly. The pod lifted a few inches off the ground and moved forward. The movement was smooth, but not fast. Not at all what the team expected. Instead of zipping through tunnels or flying through open skies at blinding speed, the pod drifted along. Simple track-like path. The view outside wasn't dramatic either. They passed by more smooth hallways, rooms with glowing panels, and other pods moving slowly across the platforms. Everything looked fine, clean, slightly shiny, but not shockingly advanced. The assistant sat quietly for a moment before finally, whispering something many of them were already thinking. Is this really it? Nobody had an answer. The pod took them through a long tunnel lined with faint patterns. The patterns seemed decorative, but nothing about them suggested high technology. The lights above flickered softly like outdated bulbs, making the tunnel feel even more ordinary. The technician chuckled quietly and whispered that even Earth's modern trains felt faster than this dot. At the end of the tunnel, the pod stopped. The door opened into another large room, this one with a high ceiling and rows of small platforms. A tall figure waited there, wearing something that looked like formal attire, though still incredibly simple, more like a uniform worn by someone working at a front desk. The figure raised the glowing device again. The words that came out were slow but clear. We show you important things, Empire. The technician murmured, finally, under their breath. But as they walked forward, the important things turned out to be far less impressive than any of them imagined. The first room contained various round objects displayed on tall stands. They might have been machines, tools, or maybe old technology from the Empire's history. But they all looked bulky and outdated, almost like museum pieces from humanity's own early experiments with electronics. A small glowing sign translated roughly to energy crystal charger, but the device looked like a toaster-sized block with blinking lights. The assistant leaned in, fascinated, and whispered that their phone's fast charger at home looked more modern. Another stand displayed something that resembled a handheld tool. The translation device called it a translator seed, but the human team couldn't figure out how it worked. When a tall figure tapped it gently, it produced a series of garbled sounds before shutting off with a sad little beep. The humans exchanged looks, realizing even the aliens' own translation gadgets had technical issues. They moved to the next section. This one contained small floating drones round, glowing, and hovering quietly. At first glance they looked impressive, but when one of the guides activated a drone, it floated sideways for a second, wobbled noticeably, then drifted too close to a display stand before correcting itself. It reminded the humans of the early prototypes Earth engineers built when testing new drone models. One of the researchers whispered, "Is everything here behind us in technology?" It was said quietly enough that only the team heard it. The pod ride had been slow. The lights flickered sometimes. The gadgets looked unreliable. The translation device struggled. And now, even the drones behaved like early experiments rather than the polished tech humans expected from a galactic empire. Still, The tall figures guiding them seemed extremely proud of everything they showed. They explained each device with slow, careful phrases, as if presenting treasures from a long and respected history. The team didn't want to be rude. They nodded politely, asking small questions when they could. But inside, they were trying to make sense of everything. Earth had always imagined alien civilizations as powerful, advanced, brilliant. Yet here they were, standing inside what was supposed to be a mighty galactic empire, looking at technology that felt a generation behind smartphones and modern public transport. Eventually, the tour led them to a long observation window. This was the first time the humans expected something truly grand. They braced themselves to see a massive futuristic city, glowing towers, ships flying in organized patterns. Something straight from science fiction. Instead, they saw a landscape that looked more like an industrial district on a cloudy day. Few large buildings stood in the distance. A handful of small lights hovered slowly in the air. A large dome, cracked slightly on one side, sat near the far corner of the area. Nothing sparkled or shone dramatically. It was okay, functional. That was the best word for it. One of the guides gestured proudly at the view. The translation device echoed. Capital Center. Main place of empire. The entire room went quiet. The humans didn't know whether to feel impressed or confused. This place, this simple, almost unimpressive area, was the heart of a galactic empire? The assistant whispered. We have malls back home that look fancier than this. The technician didn't argue, but instead of feeling disappointed, a strange warmth. The human team had no idea how their quiet reactions were being interpreted by the tall figures guiding them. They were too busy trying to stay polite and not show how confused they were about the so-called grand capital of a galactic empire. The place was calm and clean, yes, but far from the extraordinary vision they had always imagined when thinking about alien civilizations. No floating megacities, no impossible machines, no glowing crystal towers. Just simple structures, slow-moving transport pods, and technology that often beeped in the wrong places. But on the other side, the tall beings saw something very different. From their perspective, the humans were incredibly calm. Too calm. The humans walked through the capital with steady expressions, observing everything like experienced experts who had seen far more advanced wonders before this. They didn't gasp. They didn't freeze in shock. They didn't even take a step. Back when the drones hiccuped or the lights flickered overhead. In fact, at one point, the assistant shrugged quietly during a demonstration, and one of the tall guides interpreted it as a coded gesture. Something like, "Yes, we understand. Your empire is trying hard." The guides exchanged silent glances with each other, unsure how to interpret these calm reactions. They began to assume something that would later grow into a huge misunderstanding. That humans were hiding superior knowledge. When the team left the observation deck, the tall guides met quietly near a doorway and whispered in soft tones. Their translation device didn't pick up the words clearly, but the humans could tell something serious was being discussed. The tall figure's shoulders lifted and lowered in a pattern that looked like worry. The technician asked softly if maybe the guides thought the humans were bored. The assistant laughed under their breath and said they hoped not. They didn't want to insult anyone. They genuinely appreciated the tour. They just didn't find anything shocking enough to react dramatically. But the guides saw every small gesture differently. They saw the humans' calmness as confidence. They saw their gentle nods as signs of deep technical understanding. They saw their quiet stares as evidence of someone analyzing weaknesses in the Empire's systems. The humans had no idea these thoughts were forming around them like invisible clouds. One guide raised the glowing translation device and spoke carefully. The words came out slowly. Your technology. Very advanced? The team froze for a moment. They hadn't even shown anything yet, except a few Earth gadgets they carried in their pockets. The assistant pulled out their phone earlier to record a hallway, and the device had immediately caught the attention of several tall beings. When the phone screen turned on with a swipe, the aliens had murmured quietly among themselves. When the assistant tapped the screen and the camera activated instantly, the murmurs grew louder. And when the phone's flashlight turned on with a single tap, one of the tall guides actually stepped back a little in surprise, not to the humans. It was nothing, just a normal part of life. But to the tall beings, the glowing rectangle was either extremely advanced or extremely dangerous. Now, standing in the middle of the Capitol building, the humans looked at each other, then back at the guide holding the translation device. The technician tried to answer politely. Our technology is not very advanced. We are still learning. The device translated the words as best as it could, but the tone came out wrong. It said something closer to, "We choose not to reveal our full capabilities." The tall figures stiffened. Their posture changed instantly. It wasn't fear. It was respect. Deep respect. As if they were standing in front of a powerful leader who had just given a subtle warning. The assistants' eyes widened as soon as they heard the translation. They whispered, "Oh no, it didn't translate right." But the tall beings seemed convinced. The misunderstanding deepened even more when the humans tried to explain where Earth was located. They described their solar system, their small planet, their early stage of space travel, their limited abilities. The translation device struggled. It kept twisting their words, turning simple statements into mysterious phrases. "We are still developing" became, "We advance faster than expected." "We only reached our moon" became, "We have tested neighboring worlds." "We are learning space travel" became, "Our reach is controlled." Every attempt to be humble sounded like coded language, meant to hide their superiority. And then another thing happened. One of the tall guides asked if the humans came with protective ships. The humans laughed nervously and said they didn't even know they were coming here until today. The device tried to translate this, but instead it said, "We do not need ships." At that moment, the tall beings exchanged another set of silent, alarmed glances. To them, this meant humans could travel through wormholes or space itself without using physical vessels. The idea was terrifying and impressive at the same time. The misunderstanding continued to grow like a snowball rolling down a hill. The team was then guided to what looked like a meeting chamber. The ceilings were high, and soft lights glowed up the walls. Seats lined the edges of the room, arranged in a large circle. A few tall beings wearing formal-looking fabrics entered the room, standing straight and composed. These new figures looked like officials. Important ones. The technician whispered, "I think this is becoming more serious than a tour." One of the figures stepped forward with a calm, authoritative presence. It greeted the humans politely using the translation device. Its voice echoed softly. "We honor you. You arrive without warning. You walk with calmness. We hope for peace." The human team looked at each other in confusion. Peace? They didn't remember threatening anything. They hadn't even raised their voices. The technician tried to respond with the friendliest tone possible. "We come in peace. We mean no harm. We are simple explorers." But the translation device twisted the final phrase. The words it produced were, "We travel simply because we choose to." This made the officials uneasy. They whispered among themselves, as if analyzing coded messages. One glanced at the humans carefully, then at the device they were carrying. The assistant held their phone awkwardly, feeling suddenly guilty for something they didn't understand. The officials seemed convinced that Earth was some hidden superpower, a quiet, mysterious civilization capable of stepping into a galactic empire without ships, without fear, and without interest in their technology. One official asked a slow, cautious question. "Why did you come?" "To our borders?" The assistant answered honestly. "It was an accident. The device turned this into, we arrived by our own choice." Another official stepped back slightly, an expression of deep respect crossing their face. The misunderstanding had reached a point where even the humans knew they couldn't fix it easily. Every attempt to correct something only made it sound worse. They felt trapped in a confusing situation where every sentence became a mystery. The guides then escorted the humans to a waiting area that looked like a quiet lounge. Soft cushions lined the seats, and a few glowing objects stood on shelves nearby. The humans sat down, feeling overwhelmed. They discussed quietly among themselves. The assistant said, "They think we're something we're not." The technician rubbed their forehead. "And every time we try to clarify, the device twists our words." Another researcher added, "We can't keep denying it. They won't believe us." They sat in silence for a few minutes, thinking. The room was peaceful, but the air felt heavy with tension. They could hear the officials talking quietly in the hallway, probably debating how to handle their powerful guests. It was almost funny, in a strange way. The humans were tired, lost, and still trying to make sense of an empire that looked like a slightly upgraded version of their own world, but the empire was seeing them as something else entirely. A rapid flash of soft lights suddenly passed across the ceiling. Above the ceiling, a sign that some decision had been made. A tall figure entered the room, bowed slightly, and said through the device, "The Empire wishes to prepare an offering of alliance. We hope to show respect." The humans froze again. Alliance? Offering? Respect? They didn't even know what the Empire wanted from them. They hadn't asked for anything, but now the entire Galactic Empire believed that Earth was a powerful civilization, hiding its real strength behind polite smiles and simple clothing. The humans didn't know how to correct this, and the Empire was already planning for something far bigger. The humans sat in the quiet room, unsure of what was going to happen next. They didn't know whether to feel nervous or honored. The phrase "offering of alliance" kept echoing in their minds. It sounded huge, serious, and way beyond anything they were prepared for. They had come here by accident, yet the Empire seemed ready to welcome them like honored guests from some hidden, superior world. The technician leaned back in the seat and sighed. "We can't accept any kind of alliance. We don't even know who they are." The assistant nodded slowly. "But if we refuse, the device might twist our words again. They might misunderstand it as some kind of threat." That was the real problem now. Every sentence risked becoming something else entirely. Even a simple phrase could turn respectful into arrogant, or humble into powerful. They had no way of knowing what the translation device would decide to do next. A faint humming sound came from the hall as more tall figures approached. Their long steps were slow, almost ceremonial. When they entered the room, the humans immediately noticed that these beings were dressed differently. Their clothing had soft patterns that glowed faintly, like symbols of authority. One of them stepped forward and bowed deeply. The translation device repeated a calm greeting. "We hope we have not rushed you. We wish only to honor your arrival." The humans exchanged uncertain looks. They stood up politely, not wanting to appear rude. The assistant tried to smile, though it felt difficult not knowing what would happen. The tall figure spoke again, its voice steady. "Our empire values peace. We value wisdom. We value those who walk without fear. You arrive gently and without display of power. This shows great strength." The humans blinked in confusion. They didn't know that their normal behavior looked like advanced discipline to the Empire. They had simply been too tired and overwhelmed to react strongly earlier. Another official stepped forward, holding a small case. It opened slowly, revealing a glowing crystal-like object. The tall figures watched the humans with hopeful eyes. The translation device spoke. "We offer this symbol of alliance. It represents trust between civilizations." The humans stared at the glowing object. It was beautiful, glowing softly like a small captured star. But accepting it would mean accepting the alliance. Rejecting it could insult the Empire. The technician whispered carefully, "We can't take this. What if it means something serious? What if it's some high-level commitment?" The assistant whispered back, "If we refuse, they might think we are declaring independence from their empire, or something much worse." Before the humans could decide anything, one of the tall figures looked at the assistant's phone again. The small device in their hand lit up briefly, casting a tiny beam of light on the floor. The officials stared at it as though witnessing a priceless artifact. The assistant quickly hid the phone behind their back. But the tall beings had already decided something in their minds. One official turned to the others and spoke in their own language, too fast for the translation device to catch everything. But a few words came through: portable, energy, unknown technology, high efficiency. The humans could feel the misunderstanding spreading again, like ripples in a pond. Finally, the lead official bowed once more. "We do not ask for secrets," the device translated. "We only wish to show respect. If you accept the symbol, you accept peace between us." The humans took a quiet breath. They needed to choose carefully. After a moment of silent agreement, the technician stepped forward slowly. They didn't touch the glowing object yet, but they bowed politely, trying to show they valued the gesture while not fully committing. The assistant whispered, "Please translate this correctly." The technician spoke softly, "We accept your kindness." The device hesitated, then translated, "We accept your gesture of goodwill." It finally got something right. The officials brightened. Their glowing patterns shifted in warm colors. They took this as a peaceful acceptance, not a formal alliance. It was the perfect middle ground without the humans even planning it. The glowing symbol was gently placed on a pedestal near the humans instead of in their hands. This meant the Empire wasn't binding them into anything, only gifting a sign of friendship. For the first time that day, the humans felt relief, but the situation wasn't over yet. The officials guided them toward another room. The walls shifted softly as they walked, as if the structure itself responded to movement. A large window revealed something unexpected, an enormous gathering outside. Crowds of tall beings stood calmly in open areas, watching the building with quiet respect. They weren't shouting or waving. Their way of showing support seemed to be silence and stillness. The humans felt a strange mix of awe and pressure. They hadn't expected to become symbols of anything. The assistant whispered, "They think we're important. Really important." The technician replied, "We just need to get home before this gets bigger." But getting home was the next problem. The official, leading them, paused beside a large circular door. It curved open smoothly, revealing a spacious hall with lines of soft light across the floor. In the center stood a tall structure that looked like a gateway, but its shape didn't match any Earth technology. The official spoke through the device. "We wish to return you to your world safely. The path that brought you here was unstable. We prepare a controlled route for you." The humans' eyes widened. The Empire wasn't trying to keep them here. They were trying to help them go back. This was the most surprising moment of all. The assistant whispered, "They're actually letting us return." The technician nodded. "They never wanted anything from us. They were just confused." Another figure approached and placed a gentle hand near the glowing structure. The tall frame hummed softly, light spreading across its surface like liquid. Metal. The device translated the official's words. "This path will connect you to the space you came from. It will return you near your world." The humans stepped closer. They weren't sure if the gateway was safe, but they trusted the Empire more now. The officials had acted with nothing but calmness and respect. One of the tall beings spoke again, this time with a tone that seemed almost emotional. "We hope one day our worlds will meet again." With full understanding, the humans nodded. They were touched by the sincerity in the alien's voice. They didn't know if they would ever return, but they felt grateful. The Empire, despite all the confusion, had shown them kindness, patience, and a surprising willingness to treat outsiders with dignity. The assistant took one last look around the hall. The gentle colors of the walls, the calm faces of the tall beings, the soft humming of the gateway. It felt unreal that a simple accident had brought them so far from Earth. The technician stepped forward and bowed one last time. "Thank you," they said quietly, hoping the simple word carried across cultures. The translation device finally behaved and translated it correctly. The tall figures bowed in return. The humans stepped through the glowing path together. A wave of light passed over them. It wasn't painful or frightening, just warm, like stepping through sunlight. And just like that, the Empire disappeared. The next moment, they were floating again in the familiar blackness of space near there. Small ship. The stars were the same. The silence was the same. It felt as if nothing had happened, yet everything had changed. They climbed back inside, stunned and quiet. Earth waited for them far below, unaware of the strange adventure that had just taken place. As the ship began its slow journey home, the assistant finally spoke in a soft voice. "No one is going to believe this." The technician smiled faintly. "Maybe that's for the best." They didn't have proof. They didn't bring back the glowing object. They didn't record conversations clearly. And the Empire wasn't planning to contact Earth. Soon. It was almost as if the whole encounter was meant to stay a quiet secret. A gentle misunderstanding in a vast universe. Humans who weren't amazed by a galactic empire. And a galactic empire that believed humans were far more advanced than they actually were. In the end, both sides walked away with a strange kind of respect. And perhaps, someday, the stars would bring them together again, under clearer communication, and maybe with a few fewer misunderstandings. Another researcher added, "We can't keep denying it. They won't believe us." They sat in silence for a few minutes, thinking. The room was peaceful, but the air felt heavy with tension. They could hear the officials talking quietly in the hallway, probably debating how to handle their powerful guests. It was almost funny, in a strange way. The humans were tired, lost, and still trying to make sense of an empire that looked like a slightly upgraded version of their own world. But the Empire was seeing them as something else entirely. A rapid flash of soft lights suddenly passed. Across the ceiling, a sign that some decision had been made. A tall figure entered the room, bowed slightly, and said through the device, "The Empire wishes to prepare an offering of alliance. We hope to show respect." The humans froze again. Alliance? Offering? Respect? They didn't even know what the Empire wanted from them. They hadn't asked for anything. But now the entire galactic empire believed that Earth was a powerful civilization, hiding its real strength behind polite smiles and simple clothing. The humans didn't know how to correct this, and the Empire was already planning for something far bigger.